Welcome to my new look channel, That's Cakeable. I'm Janine and I hope you enjoy this week's video. So this week I've decided to make you something a little bit creepy. It's a movie popcorn cup with Pennywise, the dancing clown's hand, reaching up out of the cup to give you his red book. Oh, and if you don't know who Pennywise the dancing clown is, number one, what rock have you been living under? And number two, may I introduce you to Pennywise? Good looking character, isn't he? You're welcome. So this week I've done something a little bit different. I'm using some rice cereal treat layers. You can get the recipe for my rice cereal treats at my website, that'scakeable.com. I make the rice cereal treats, pop them into a 5-inch cake tin lined with Glad wrap and press them all down very firmly, freeze them and then pop them out about half an hour later. Ready to go. Okay, so for this cake I used my vanilla cake, 5-inch vanilla cake, coated in some simple syrup to make sure it stays nice and moist as we work. And then I've covered that in some white chocolate ganache. On top of that, I put the rice cereal treat layer and cover that in white chocolate ganache also. I've decided to use white chocolate ganache for this cake because it's stable. It makes it really, really stable. And it is carved and it is tapered. So now for some extra stability, I just popped a dowel right into the center of that cake to keep it upright. Oh, do you guys like horror movies? If you do, please comment below and tell me your favorite. I'd love to know. Okay, so I've taken a 4-inch circle cutter, put it in the center of my cake and just made a slight line in the top of the cake as a guide for the tapering. I start tapering downwards, only the first 2 layers at the top to start with. Once I'm happy with that, I continue down. Slow and steady wins the race here because you can always take more cake off. You can't put more cake on. Well, you can, but it's never as good. And when you're happy with the shape, make sure you grab your white chocolate ganache and give it a quick crumb coat to stop those nasty crumbs getting out. Once that's chilled, I come back in with my next coat of ganache, put some on the top, and then I place a 4-inch cake board on the top of the cake and use that as a guide to taper my ganache downwards. I use my bench scraper to smooth it all out. And there we have it. Let it set, and then once it's ready to cover, take some simple syrup and coat the entire cake so that our fondant has something to stick to. I've rolled out a white piece of fondant up onto my rolling pin and I've just popped that straight over the entire cake. Now this is a bit more awkward because it's tapered, but it basically works the same as a round. A lot of fluffing out the pleats and smoothing down. I take my acetate smoother, which I run along the base as well, that cuts a little line in there, which comes in handy for this. I use it as a guide to cut the excess fondant off my cake. Now if you're using a knife, make sure that it's straight up and down, not on an angle, or you'll end up with a beveled edge on the base of your cake. We have to release that cake ball that's in the top now, so I just cut out a section of fondant on the top and run my knife flush along that cake board to release the rest. Another quick smooth and it's ready. Okay, so now I've rolled out some red fondant very thinly, chosen the width of stripe that I wanted to use, and I'm just cutting out some stripes. But prior to that, I cut out a couple of white stripes in the same width as the red. Now I'm just basically leaning them against the cake, not securing them at the width that I want the red stripes to be at, and I'm using them as a template for my larger stripe in the center. So I pop them where I want them. I take a very thin piece of white fondant and I just rub the edges of the stripes into that fondant. What we end up with is a fondant template. So I cut that template out, pop it on some cardboard, and I just trace around it, cut it out in card, and we now have a template ready to make those white stripes. Okay, so now we can start on the red stripes. We place the first red stripe on, now looking directly at the stripe in front of you. Make sure that it's straight up and down. Using a ruler, it's important. You want to butt that white stripe right up against that red stripe. Once again, the cake has to be facing directly towards you, and you'll notice that the right side isn't straight up and down when you use a ruler. So take a ruler and make sure that you indent it where it would be straight. Slice right up that line, and now it's flush. But the next red stripe up against that, and continue on all the way around your cake. When you get to the back, you'll notice that they don't meet up evenly, so don't do it. Take the last white stripe or red, whatever you have, butt it up flush against the left side and run your finger along the seam on the right side, and you'll see that it ends up with a crease. Remove the stripe, cut along that crease, pop it in, and it'll fit beautifully. One last smooth, removing the bottom and the top excess. And now a bit of cake magic. I take a piece of dental floss and just run it underneath to remove the cake from my setup board. Voila! Flip it. Oh, it's scary. Now I'm removing that dowel so I have room for Pennywise's hand. And then I'm just putting a slightly light coat of ganache on the top. I'm using the cake tin that I used to make the cake as a template with some white fondant to make a lid for the cup. It's not going to fit perfectly, but that's okay because we're going to cover it up shortly and you'll see. And then I take a damp piece of paper towel to dampen my bench and roll out a cord of white fondant. Dampening the bench gives you a bit more traction, so it's easier to roll. Little trick. I take that cord and wrap it around the top of that cup. And I should have done that while it was still upside down because it would have been perfectly flush, but now I'm going to cut out the popcorn sign using my tuppets that I've sprayed liberally with cooking spray because it makes it come out easier. I'm taking some baking paper with some vegetable shortening rubbed over it, and then I flip the image, mirror image, and place my letters on there. Pop a little bit of water on the back of those letters and then place it onto my popcorn cup, pressing very lightly so that they all stay. Peel away.
Cotton candy, hot dogs, and popcorn? Popcorn! Is that your favorite?
Okay, to make the popcorn, it's really, really simple. I've just taken some light yellow fondant, rolled it into small balls, and then rolled out a piece of fondant and used some very small blossom cutters to cut out some blossoms. I place the blossoms on top of the balls, take a balling tool to make an indent in the center of those blossoms, and just fill out the top of the blossoms on the top. Sort of gonna make them a bit ugly because it's popcorn. To color the popcorn, I've got my watercolor food color, and I color the entire popcorn with that, and then I just take some gel paste in the same color, which I use ivory, to make the center. To make the hand, I've taken some wire as my armature and I've just made a loop at the top and twisted the base. And to bulk up the top, I used some aluminium foil. I used an extra piece later on to make it slightly more bulky because it was a bit skinny. I then cut 5 pieces of wire, using my own hand as a reference, as you can see, to place into the top to make some skeleton area for his fingers. And there we go. To build up the meat and the flesh, I've used some white modelling chocolate just around the base of the hand. And then to start creating the fingers, I've just rolled up some snakes and popped them over the top of those wires. Initially it looks pretty crazy, but it gets there. Look at some anatomy pictures too, it really helps. Putting on some knuckles. And now I've bent it over because he has to hold that balloon. You can see some wires poking out there. I've just trimmed some of them off, but then his knuckles covered that up anyway. I added some more modelling chocolate for his knuckles, so that was fine. I put a dowel in the base of the hand, put it into some styro so that I could start modelling his arm. I've used my modelling Rice Krispies to build up his arm to initial shape, covered it in Glad wrap and left it overnight. Then it's really firm, so easy to carve the next day. Now I just carve away until I'm happy with the shape of his arm. And I carved my finger too. Nothing a monster can't fix. I coat that in some simple syrup and I wrap a piece of fondant around to begin building up his clothing. Cut away the excess on the seam there. If you guys haven't liked and subscribed yet, Pennywise is coming to get you, so please do so. I smooth out that sleeve with some fondant. Yes, it works. And now on to making his first very jagged ruffled cuff. I'm using some white modelling chocolate and then I'm just scoring the edges with a paring knife to make it look pretty scruffy. I found a Hessian impression mat to give the cuff a little bit more life. Popped a little bit of water around his wrist and then slowly took that cuff around the edges of his wrist, and as I took it around I sort of ruffled it as I went. Press it on nice and tight and it's ready to rumble. Okay, so I've taken 50-50 mix of a grey fondant and some modelling chocolate to make his next cuff. And I've done the same thing but with a straight edge. Cutting off the excess, and now we're ready to dress his arm. I've taken some of that same grey fondant and just cut out a whole bunch of stripes. Lay one down and then continue laying them upon each other. Layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. So if you've seen the actual movie, he's got like a shimmery silver layer over his costume. So I just took a damp brush in some silver luster and put that over his sleeve and then dirtied it up a little bit with some black petal dust. I've made two more of those cords that I made earlier, a very thin maroon one and a slightly thicker ivory one, and I put them together and twist them in opposite directions to make a rope. This will go around the cuff of his sleeve. Bit of water to attach, and around it goes. Now, I've made life a little bit difficult for myself. He's got these little balls that go around the edge of his sleeve, which I'll show you in just a second. You could paint the stripes on, but I decided to do them one by one. That's me. And then I just used a little bit of water to pop those on also. Now I chickened out and I put the arm in prior, but you see what happened? My dowel was too long and it came through the back. Take note. I used some royal icing to secure the base of the hand into the top of the cup, and then I've just taken some white fondant rolled into very ugly balls and popped them all around the top of that cake. I've taken the same colour fondant that I used to make my popcorn, rolled it out very thinly and just draped it over the top of those balls, and then I smooth over them with my hand so that you see the impression come through. Then I cut off all the excess on the edges and use that same ivory watercolour food colour to colour the popcorn. To add our popcorn, I've used some yellow royal icing and just pop them around sporadically. Finally, I add the red balloon and he's ready.
Hiya, Georgie.
Well guys, thanks so much for joining me again this week. I hope you really enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed putting it together for you, and maybe you learned a thing or two or just enjoyed watching as the whole thing came together. If you haven't liked and subscribed yet, please do so, and don't forget to hit that bell down the bottom so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Until next week, don't forget to get your cake on. See you later guys.